So how do you use data to inform decisions for planning and teaching a teaching cycle?
I think the first kind of core part to that, though, is to decide or to gather your data or what data sources you've got.
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of broken it down into kind of the data that I get. So there's always in English kind of classroom, you have your NAPLAN data. So you have the kids' most recent NAPLAN, maybe you'll get that year's worth depending.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, you can always set up spelling and grammar practices. So you have that data on hand in like a first lesson. And we've also been using something called STAR reading assessment, which is a really good judge of a kid's reading ability and their reading age.
Yeah.
So you kind of put that all together, and that can help determine things like, can this kid actually read this text that you've set? Or do you need to change, if the book's too difficult for them, the vocab's too hard. And I think that's what's great about the STAR reading one, having a good reading age, having that, so but then other things like spelling and grammar. If you know a kid can read really well, but their grammar and spelling are not so good, then you know that they're going to have a good train of thought, but their writing's not going to be so good. So having that in mind, having the different kinds of data can help you decide early on, what kind of books you're going to look at, what kinds of assessment will work for them. Do you need to modify their task at all? Will they be able to do just this classroom kind of work, or do you need to change it slightly for those students, do that kind of modification?
And do you do that at the beginning of a semester, or do you do that ongoing through the teaching cycle?
So the spelling and kind of grammar you do straight up initially. That's like first week kind of thing. NAPLAN data I look at kind of early on. Because it takes a little bit that you don't always get the data that the kids do mid-year until probably about term 3, term 4. So by that point, there's not a lot of learning you can still do. And the STAR reading, the reading one is actually ongoing. So you can actually see an improvement growth.
Excellent.
Getting the kids to read, getting them to read at their level, and then getting them to improve that level. You can actually see it it's a work in progress. And then that can determine, further, maybe in term 1, sure, their reading might not be so good, but by the time you get them in term 4, their reading might be a bit higher, so you can reach for those higher texts.
Gotcha. How do you provide differentiated teaching and learning opportunities in a teaching cycle?
So I'm going to jump back to the reading assessment. So first of all, that one is the big indicator of,
So your diagnostic testing and assessment is really important there.
You look at all your different diagnostics and there's also in that as well, you informally assessing the kids' work. Like, sure, you can look at, all these kinds of other kind of data sources, but just looking at by this point, when you come to an assessment, you'll have seen what their work is like. Even if it's just over their shoulder in the classroom, or if it is something that they've handed to you written wise. Sometimes it's good to get them to write, have a booklet that they work through and then hold on to it, or get them to do a piece of writing that they then give to you. Once you have that data, then you can actually do a bit of modification. And the biggest one, I think, for differentiation is assessment tasks. Where you make the modifications for that. So maybe it could be as simple as giving a kid another week because they've got issues at home. They don't have a computer at home, so they need more time at school. But particularly for other kids who have got EALD kids, that can mean, cutting the task down a little bit in terms of amount, and also changing the quality of what they need to make. So giving them a little bit of differentiated kind of learning. Once again, a choice thing, often giving them, telling them you have to write an essay about this text often can be a bit daunting. Giving them some options helps. If they, you can choose this one or this one or this one. We did a whole range of text. You get to pick one or pick two or something. Another thing can be, it's just in my head, for the EALD kids,
And what does ELD stand for?
Oh, sorry, EALD is English as a second language.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. I forget the actual acronym. EAL, second language or dialect.
Yeah.
Additional, I think English as an additional language or dialect.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Templates.
Yeah.
Essentially giving kids like that need modification, even if they're not ELD, maybe if they're just lower level reading or lower level of other things. It could be as simple as giving them a word bank of useful words to use, giving them a head start, essentially, like, here's what your essay should look like, or here's some sentence starters for you, or here's a fill in the blanks, depending on the level, because that's the hardest part for kids like that, or even just kids in general, is just putting the pen to paper, getting the start.
Yeah.
Giving them a place to start is kind of the most key kind of point for differentiated learning.
Yeah.
Because if you give them, a bit of a head start jumping in, then they feel like they're already a few steps in, even only when they do like their first kind of part. So I think that's quite important for differentiated kind of learners.
And how do you extend students that need like extension, they're performing above the year level? Yeah.
For a lot of that one, there are extension-based tasks in the assessment task.
Excellent. Yeah.
And they often involve, there is that additional kind of aspect of adding a little bit more, but quite often, particularly in English, it's transforming what you've done in kind of just one kind of section of writing to, larger sections of writing. So changing writing just paragraphs into a whole essay.
Yeah.
It ends up being quite a bit. Sometimes for extensions, for more practical or like multimodal tasks, it involves extending or doing another text, or involving in some other way. That's the trickier part, I think, of differentiation.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can do for modifying a task for higher levels.
Yeah.
Without changing the subject or the content.
Yeah.
I think if you get that early on and you flag a really a gifted or talented student in the classroom, the best thing that you can do is extend their classwork. It also takes pressure off the actual assessment task.
Yeah.
Sure, they'll have a go at the extension and do that little bit extra, but I think extending them in the classroom, do that a little bit more, think about that a little bit harder. Have a go at formulating it in the classroom is better than actually delivering it in an assessment task form, because then it just feels like it's just more, the kids that are gifted and talented are just being, they're being punished for being really good by having to do more work for assessments. Getting them to do trickier work or a more challenging question once they've done the basics in a classroom is more beneficial, I find.
So sort of
at
like
least it's more receptive.
Increasing the complexity rather than the volume sort of thing.
You can do a little bit of volume, and I think that's, no one's, if you're just doing volume, then you're just you're not going to find that you'll have kids that want to be extended.
No, that makes sense. And how do you provide feedback to learners after they've completed those assessments?
So the key one is through, feedback and assessment. You have them. The easiest way to do it is to just circle criteria. Deliver, then a verbal kind of informal feedback from that.
So would you use a rubric for that criteria, or would you have like set marks for things, or?
Normally, it's more a rubric of criteria, particularly for English, because there is that kind of, a leeway of interpretation. Obviously, the criteria always involves having spelling and punctuation as kind of a key component.
Yes, of course,
but sometimes you may have more of a checklist tick. Have you done this? Have you done this? Kind of allocation of marks like you would for something like in a maths test or for a science experiment, or just a multiple choice kind of answer test where, you get marks for getting it right. But more often than not, it ends up being a bit more of a, that kind of thinking criteria of, has the kid achieve this kind of context? Have they met